On June 17, 1966, in Paterson, New Jersey, a triple murder took place at the Lafayette Bar and Grill. In the middle of the panic that followed, police focused on a famous boxer named Rubin "Hurricane" Carter. Carter was not an ordinary suspect. He was a rising middleweight fighter, known for his speed, power, and aggressive style inside the ring. But outside the ring, he was also a black man, living in a time when racial tension shaped how many investigations were handled. After the murders, Carter and another man, John Ardis, were stopped by police. They maintained their innocence, but investigators continued building a case around them. The prosecution relied heavily on witness testimony from people whose statements would later become deeply questionable. In 1967, Carter and Ardis were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For Carter, the punishment was more than prison bars. His boxing career was destroyed. His public image changed overnight from athlete to murderer. The man who once dreamed of becoming a world champion was now fighting a completely different battle. A battle to prove he had not committed the crime. Years passed. Then more questions began to surface. Witnesses changed stories. Evidence problems became harder to ignore. Supporters, lawyers, and journalists started pushing the case back into public view. In 1976, Carter and Ardis were retried and convicted again, but the fight did not end there. Finally, on November 8, 1985, a federal judge overturned their conviction. The judge criticized the prosecution's case, saying it had been built around racial prejudice and hidden evidence rather than fairness. In 1988, the murder charges were dismissed. Rubin Carter had spent nearly 2 decades behind bars. Walked out free. Freedom could not return the years he lost, could not give him back his boxing career, could not erase the emotional weight of being labeled a killer for a crime he always denied. His case became a powerful reminder: once bias enters an investigation, truth can be buried for years. In 1985, in Alabama, Anthony Ray Hinton was arrested and charged with 2 murders of fast food restaurant managers. The case against him was shockingly thin. There were no fingerprints tying him to the crime. No reliable eyewitness placed him at the murders. The key evidence was a gun found in his mother's home. Prosecutors claimed bullets from the crime scenes matched that gun. Hinton said he was innocent. He also had an alibi. At the time of one of the crimes, he said he was at work. But because he was poor, he could not afford a powerful defense team. His appointed lawyer hired a weak firearms expert, and the prosecution attacked that expert in court. In 1986, Hinton was convicted and sentenced to death. For nearly 30 years, he lived on Alabama's death row. Every day, he woke up knowing the state could one day execute him for crimes he did not commit. He watched other prisoners leave for execution. He lived in a small cell, surrounded by fear, waiting for the system to admit what he had been saying from the beginning. Years later, independent firearms experts examined the evidence and found that the bullets could not be reliably matched to the gun from Hinton's mother's home. The entire foundation of the case began to collapse. After years of appeals, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2014 that Hinton had received inadequate legal assistance. Prosecutors eventually dropped the charges. On April 3, 2015, Anthony Ray Hinton walked out of jail a free man. He smiled, cried, and said, "The sun does shine." But he had lost 30 years. His case exposed how poverty can decide the quality of justice a person receives. If Hinton had been rich, he might have hired better experts from the beginning. Instead, weak defense and flawed forensic claims nearly cost him his life. On July 29, 1985, near Two Rivers, Wisconsin, a woman was attacked while jogging near Lake Michigan. Police soon focused on Stephen Avery, a man from Manitowoc County. The victim identified Avery as her attacker, but there was a major problem. Avery had many witnesses who said he was somewhere else at the time. Still, investigators continued with the case. Avery was arrested, charged, and convicted in 1985 for sexual assault and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 32 years in prison. For Avery, the conviction destroyed nearly 2 decades of his life. He kept saying he was innocent, but the system had already decided who he was. His family was pulled into the damage. His name became connected to a violent crime he did not commit. Years later, DNA testing became available. In 2003, DNA evidence proved that Stephen Avery was not the attacker. The evidence pointed to another man who had committed a different sexual assault. After serving 18 years in prison, Avery was exonerated and released. His case became one of the most well-known wrongful conviction cases in Wisconsin. But there is one important thing to understand. This story is about Avery's 1985 wrongful conviction. Later, Avery became involved in a separate murder case, which is still controversial and legally different from this exoneration. The 1985 case still shows a clear lesson. Once investigators lock on to one suspect, even strong alibi evidence can be ignored. And when that happens, the real criminal can remain free while an innocent person loses years of life.